I'm still on this idea of focal and subsidiary awareness that Polanyi talks about in the structure of consciousness. It may be that I'm barking up the wrong tree here completely, because obviously Polanyi did write that quite some time ago. I think it's probably 30 years old at least, that piece of writing. And I haven't come across a great body of work which refers to it. So it may be that history has not been kind to that idea, and I've no idea how the idea stacks up against developments in neuroscience, for example. However, having said that, I'm going to persist with it because I'm finding it sort of pragmatically useful as a piece of cognitive architecture to allow me to occupy certain areas of thought. So one of the uses that I'm kind of putting it to, I suppose, is in relation to well, a slight problem that I have, the distinction that you find in conceptual metaphor theory between the concept of concrete and abstract ideas. I sort of get it, but I just think I've got some reservations about it. So the idea is that concrete embodied experiences form the source for abstract disembodied concepts. So I can understand abstract disembodied concepts, like love, for example, by understanding them conceptually as metaphors drawn from concrete embodied experience. So I might understand love as if it was a hole in the ground. Instead of falling into a hole, I fall in love. And ideally I would fall in that hole with someone else, and I would fall in love with someone else. And the deeper I fall in love, of course, like the deeper I fall into a hole, the more likely I am of getting hurt. And the deeper the hole, the deeper the love, the harder it is to climb out of, and so on. So there's a whole series of entailments, but I've spoken about that before, so I'm not going to go on that. The problem I have, one of the problems I have with that, is that it sets up this quite harsh distinction, I think, between the stuff of thought and the stuff of experience. And there are distinctions to be made, clearly, but experience itself, perceptual experience, for example, seeing something, is itself kind of, well, metaphorical isn't the right word, but it is a highly processed operation. When I see a tree, even though, yes, there is an image of the tree being formed upside down and much smaller at the back of my eye, and so there is a kind of reproduction of that tree, one-to-one reproduction. That's not how seeing works. Seeing is a much more complex process than that, in which that image is distributed and worked on in different ways, and different sorts of elements of that tree to do with colour and inclination of lines and all that sort of stuff is processed. So my perception of a tree is extraordinarily processed. It's a highly cognitive act, albeit a cognitive act which is persistent, consistent, and sort of irrefutable, and irrefutably linked to the circumstances of my body and brain. So apart from those linkages, those irrefutable linkages, it seems to me there's not as much processing and cognitive activity involved in simple perception, apparently simple concrete action, as there is in metaphorical abstract actions. So how does that relate to focal and subsidiary awareness? Well, for me, I think what focal and subsidiary awareness does, at least in terms of the key example that Polanyi used, which is to do with depth perception, is it provides a really recognizable midpoint, if you like, in those things, a recognizable aspect of perception which is clearly not concrete. There is no whilst I've already said there is, when I look at a tree, sure enough there is a little image of a tree upside down and tiny at the back of my eyeball. It has that, so it's very difficult to resist the impression that impression of the tree is somehow authentically reproduced inside me because of that optical fact. But there's no optical fact which corresponds to depth perception. There's no part of my eye which reproduces the feeling of this tree being closer to me than the tree behind, or this branch being closer to me than the tree behind that, or the bird on that tree being somewhere between the branches at the front and the branches at the back, which is immediately obvious to me. But that immediately obvious perception, as I say, is not reproduced anywhere in my in the mechanics of my optical system. It's a product of the processing of the various images from both eyes, a process of the accumulation of, or the processing of what Polanyi calls subsidiary awareness to produce this focal awareness of depth perception. So depth perception itself is, it's not metaphor, but it's how information is understood, how that visual information is understood and translated and interpreted and made available in a different way, but to the same extent, presumably, that information that I have about love is translated and interpreted and made available to me, not by depth perception, but by interpretation, the hole in the ground, perhaps.